China made history this year when it became the first nation to land a spacecraft on the far side of the moon, the Chang'e 4.
Imagine a silent, silver wasteland where cold can snap steel like glass, a place humanity once called lifeless. But at the moon's south pole, something has quietly changed. Not a rumor, not a hoax. A real structure is taking shape, one designed to survive where nothing else can. And what China is building there isn't just a base, it's a system meant to endure forever. If you could claim part of the moon today, would you choose discovery or control? But what kind of power source could survive 350 hours of darkness? The answer points to something we've feared for generations, and it's already on its way. The nuclear heart that never sleeps. To survive on the moon, you don't need oxygen first. You need a heartbeat that doesn't freeze. And that's exactly where this story stops being science fiction and starts feeling uncomfortably real. Because the biggest problem on the moon isn't distance or even gravity. It's time. Specifically, the lunar night. One full night on the moon lasts about 14 Earth days, which is roughly 350 hours of complete darkness. No sunlight, no heat. Temperatures are crashing to around negative 173 degrees Celsius. That kind of cold doesn't just slow machines down, it kills them completely. So here's the uncomfortable truth most people skip over. Solar power alone cannot sustain a permanent presence on the moon. It's not reliable enough. It's not constant. And in that kind of darkness, backup batteries become a joke. Now think about that for a second. Every rover, every base, every mission that depends only on solar energy is basically running on a timer. Once the light disappears, everything starts shutting down. That's why so many lunar missions in the past have been temporary. They weren't designed to survive the night. They were designed to beat it. But this time, something changed. China looked at that 14-day darkness and didn't try to survive it. They decided to ignore it completely. Instead of chasing sunlight, they're building something that creates its own, a nuclear-powered system designed to run non-stop, day and night, without depending on the sun at all. Not a small experimental unit. We're talking about a megawatt-level nuclear reactor, the kind of power system that doesn't blink when everything around it freezes. And suddenly, the rules of the game flip. Because once you have constant power on the moon, everything else becomes possible. You can run heavy machinery without interruptions. You can process lunar soil for resources like helium-3 or rare minerals. You can maintain long-term communication systems, surveillance networks, and automated construction without worrying about shutdown cycles. In simple terms, this isn't just about surviving on the moon anymore. It's about owning it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. While other space agencies are still testing long-term solar setups and energy storage solutions, China is essentially skipping the waiting phase. It's like everyone else is carefully charging their phones with a power bank, and China just plugged the entire moon into a wall socket. Sounds dramatic, but that's the scale we're talking about. Now imagine a base at the lunar South Pole, running 24 hours a day, every single day. Machines are digging, processing, and transmitting data back to Earth in real time. No downtime, no pause. Just continuous operation in a place that was once considered completely dead. And the real question is not, can it work, but what happens if it does? Because constant power doesn't just support survival. It supports expansion. It supports control. It turns the moon from a research destination into an active working outpost. And if one nation cracks that first, they don't just gain scientific data. They gain a strategic advantage that's sitting right above every country on Earth. So let me ask you this. Does the idea of a nuclear-powered moon make you feel like we're finally solving our energy problems? Or does it feel like we've just placed a permanent reactor in the sky, quietly running above us? Because once that reactor turns on, it doesn't just power machines, it changes the balance of space itself. But a power plant, no matter how advanced, is still just a tool. It needs something to use it, something to build, to dig, to expand. And here's where things take another turn. Because China isn't planning to send humans to do the heavy lifting. Not yet. So if no one is up there swinging the tools, who or what is actually moving the dirt? The sintering swarm, robots that eat the moon. Because China isn't planning to send humans to do the heavy lifting, not yet. So if no one is up there swinging the tools, who or what is actually moving the dirt? They aren't building a base. They are growing one out of the very dust we walk on. This is where things start to feel less like space exploration and more like something out of an old sci-fi film you weren't supposed to take seriously. Except now, it's real. The mission at the center of this is Chang'e 8, and it's not just another rover dropping onto the surface to take pictures. It's a test run for something much bigger, a system that can build structures directly on the moon, using nothing but what's already there. Let that sink in for a second. Instead of launching tons of construction materials from Earth, which is insanely expensive and slow, they're planning to use the moon itself as the raw material. The gray dust you see in photos, that fine powder called regolith, is no longer just dirt. It's the foundation of an entire base. And the way they plan to shape it is what makes this whole thing feel slightly terrifying. They're using a process called sintering. In simple terms, it means heating that dust until it fuses together into solid structures, almost like turning sand into glass. But instead of giant factories, imagine small robotic units moving across the surface, focusing energy into the ground, melting it, and leaving behind hardened paths, walls, and platforms. Now picture that at night on the moon. No atmosphere, no sound, just darkness, stretching for miles. And across that silence, you have these machines, glowing faintly, moving slowly, almost like mechanical spiders. Wherever they go, the ground beneath them changes. Soft dust becomes solid, blackened material that looks like obsidian, smooth, shaped, intentional. It's not construction the way we understand it. It's a transformation. And here's the part most people miss. These robots don't need constant human control. They are designed to operate with a level of independence, coordinating tasks, mapping terrain, and building step by step. One unit prepares the surface, another processes the material, and another reinforces the structure. It's like watching a colony of ants, except each one is made of metal and programmed with precision. So instead of sending astronauts to risk their lives in extreme conditions, China is sending a workforce that doesn't breathe, doesn't sleep, and doesn't stop when the temperature drops to impossible levels. And once they start, there's nothing forcing them to stop. Think about what that means long-term. A base that expands over time without needing constant human presence. Structures are built layer by layer, not shipped piece by piece. Roads, landing pads, shelters, all formed from the same dust that's been sitting there for billions of years. It's efficient, it's smart, and if we're being honest, it's a little unsettling, because we've always imagined humans planting flags, building habitats, claiming territory. But this is different. This is machines preparing the ground before humans even arrive, quietly, continuously, without needing recognition. So let me ask you this. If robots can build entire structures without us, does that make the moon a new frontier for humanity? Or just a very expensive playground for machines that don't need us at all? And here's where the story takes another turn. Because power alone isn't enough, and builders without a purpose don't stay busy for long. There has to be a reason strong enough to justify all of this. The reactor, the robots, the long-term plan. And that reason isn't sitting in the open. It's hiding in places on the moon, where sunlight hasn't reached in over 2 billion years. So what exactly is buried in those shadows? And why does it matter enough to spark what feels like a brand new space race? The battle for the peaks of eternal light. And if those machines can build the base, then the next question isn't how they live there. It's why they chose that exact spot. On the moon, water isn't for drinking. It's for leaving. That sounds strange at first, but this is where the story shifts from science experiment to full-blown space strategy. Because what China is targeting isn't just land, it's location. Very specific, very rare, and almost impossible to compete with once claimed. At the Moon's south pole, there are places called the Peaks of Eternal Light. These are ridges and high points that are hit by sunlight almost all year round. No long freezing nights, no complete darkness, just near-constant solar energy, which means power that never really shuts off. And right next to those peaks are craters that haven't seen sunlight in billions of years. Pitch black. Temperatures so low that they trap ice permanently. Not water flowing like rivers, but frozen reserves locked inside the soil itself. And that changes everything. Because when you break that ice down, you don't just get water. You get hydrogen and oxygen. And that combination? That's rocket fuel. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't about surviving on the moon. It's about launching from it. If you can produce fuel there, you don't need to carry massive amounts from Earth. You can refuel in space. You can go further, faster, cheaper. Mars suddenly becomes realistic. Deep space missions stop being theoretical and start becoming scheduled. So when China plans missions like Chang'e 8, it's not random. It's targeted. Their robotic systems, their sintering tech, their positioning, all of it points to one thing. They are setting up near these energy-rich peaks and within reach of ice-filled craters. In simple terms, they're building the first gas station in space. And here's where it starts to feel less like exploration and more like a high-stakes heist. Because the moon isn't owned by anyone, at least on paper. International agreements say no country can claim it, but there's a loophole. You can't own land, but you can use resources. And once you build infrastructure around those resources, you create what's called a safety zone. That means others are expected to stay away to avoid interference. So you don't need to claim the moon, you just need to occupy the right spots first. Now imagine this. You control the only locations with near constant power. You sit next to the only reliable ice reserves, and you already have machines building and expanding your presence. What happens when another country lands nearby? They can't just walk in and start digging, not without violating agreements, not without risking conflict. You don't fire a single shot, but you've effectively locked everyone else out. And this is where the tension between global powers starts to rise. NASA has already made it clear they want astronauts back on the moon, pushing hard despite delays in their Artemis program. The race is real, not for flags and footprints this time, but for positioning. Because whoever gets there first doesn't just explore. They control the future routes of space travel. Think about it like this. Back in the day, controlling ports and fuel routes meant controlling trade. Now scale that idea beyond Earth. Can you imagine a world where one country controls the fuel supply for missions across the entire solar system? How would that change power back here on Earth? And suddenly, this quiet construction project doesn't feel so quiet anymore. It feels calculated. It feels permanent. It feels like someone is thinking 10 steps ahead, while everyone else is still debating step 1. You might think the US or others could just land nearby and start their own operation. But China is already building something stronger than fences. They are building presence, infrastructure, and legal protection all at once. No explosions, no headlines screaming conflict, just machines working in silence, turning dust into dominance. So the real question isn't whether a base is being built, it's whether the most valuable real estate off Earth is already being taken. How do you steal a moon without breaking a single law? The lunar NATO, a geopolitical checkmate. The moon isn't just being divided by rockets and landing sites anymore. It's being divided by agreements, alliances, and signatures that most people have never even heard of. And while everyone is watching the hardware, the real power play is happening quietly, on paper. The most terrifying thing China is building isn't made of metal or nuclear fuel. It's made of ink and signatures. Think about this for a second. Back in the previous chapter, we talked about territory. those peaks of eternal light, the rare zones that can power an entire lunar economy. But controlling land is only half the game. The real question is, how do you make sure no one can challenge you once you're there? This is where things shift from engineering to strategy. China isn't just building a base. They are building something called the International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS. And on the surface, it sounds harmless. It's framed as a global scientific project, a peaceful collaboration open to partners. But when you look closer, the list of partners tells a very different story. Russia is in. Pakistan is in. The UAE is in. Several other nations, especially from what's often called the Global South, are joining in. And suddenly, this isn't one country claiming a piece of the moon, it's a coalition. And that changes everything. Because now, if anyone challenges that base, they aren't just dealing with China. They are stepping into a situation where it looks like they are interfering with an international scientific effort. It's no longer a territorial dispute. It becomes a diplomatic crisis. That's what experts call lawfare, using legal frameworks and international partnerships as a shield. And here's where it gets even more interesting. NASA, led by figures like Bill Nelson, has already started talking about something called safety zones. These are areas around lunar operations meant to prevent interference or accidents. On paper, that sounds reasonable. You don't want two missions colliding on the moon, but in practice, these safety zones can act like invisible borders. So imagine this. China and its partners set up a base near one of the most resource-rich areas on the moon. Then they establish a safety zone around it. Now, any other country that tries to land nearby risks being accused of violating that zone. You see the move here? It's not just about being first. It's about making sure no one else can follow. And because this is wrapped in the language of cooperation and science, it becomes very hard to push back without looking like the aggressor. This is what makes the ILRS so powerful. It's not just infrastructure, it's influence. It pulls in countries that want a stake in space, but may not have the resources to build their own programs. It offers them a seat at the table, and in return, it builds a network of support that stretches far beyond Earth's orbit. So the question becomes uncomfortable. Is this really a shared scientific dream, or a strategic alliance designed to lock down the most valuable real estate off-planet? Because if one coalition controls the fuel, controls the energy, and controls the legal framework around it, they don't just control the moon, they control access to everything beyond it. Mars, deep space missions, future colonies, all of it. And the timeline is not some distant sci-fi idea. Plans are already being drafted. Missions are already being scheduled. Agreements are already being signed. With the board set and the pieces moving, the only question left is, how much time do we have before the gate closes forever? Let me ask you this. If space becomes controlled not by whoever explores it, but by whoever writes the rules first, what does that mean for the rest of us back here on Earth? Because the calendar for the end of the moon as we know it might not be coming. It might already be here. The 2030 deadline and the final warning. We aren't waiting for the future. We are watching it happen in real time on our telescopes. Look closely at the timeline, because this is where it stops feeling like a theory and starts feeling like a countdown. China isn't talking about distant dreams anymore. The missions are already mapped, funded, and moving. First comes Chang'e 7. This isn't just another landing. It is a targeted hunt at the moon's south pole, scanning for water ice, mapping terrain, and testing conditions where a permanent base can actually survive. Water means fuel. Water means life. And suddenly, the moon is no longer a rock. It becomes a refueling station. Then comes Chang'e 8, and this is where things shift from exploration to construction. We are talking about testing 3D printing on the lunar surface, using moon soil to build structures. Not in theory, not in labs, on the moon itself. That means walls, shelters, and landing pads. the first bricks of something permanent. And here's the part most people miss. You don't test a building unless you're planning to stay. By the time we reach 2030, the goal becomes clear. A crewed landing. Not just flags and footprints like the old days, but humans stepping into a system that's already been prepared for them. Think about that. Robots arrive first. Infrastructure follows. Humans come last into something that's already waiting. This is not a race anymore. It's a setup. And while the public still sees rockets as rare events, the reality is much quieter. Hardware is being assembled. Contracts are signed. Launch windows are booked years in advance. The future isn't coming. It's scheduled. So ask yourself this. If one side is building, mapping, and settling, what happens to everyone else who arrives late? Because space doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards presence. And that brings us to the real question that no one wants to answer out loud. Do you think the 2030s will be remembered as the decade we united in space, or the decade we quietly divided the stars? Look up tonight, because that familiar glow is no longer just a rock in space. The moon is quietly transforming into something powerful, something engineered, something alive with purpose. With nuclear-powered systems and missions like Chang'e already paving the way, this is no longer theory. It's active construction. What, how, and why are unfolding right now above us. So when you look up in 10 years, will you see a peaceful colony or a strategic fortress? Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for more deep dives into space secrets, China's moon base, and the new space race. What do you think China's real end goal is?